The dog who hated sweaters, a funny Christmas sleep story for pet lovers. Barley woke to the particular quality of winter light that he had come to associate with good things. It was the soft, silvery glow that filtered through the curtains on special mornings. It's the kind of light that meant the house would soon fill with wonderful smells and extra people, and perhaps, if he was very lucky, a scrap of turkey skin would find its way to the floor. He stretched on his dog bed, extending each leg in turn, and let out a satisfied groan that came from deep in his chest. Yes, this was going to be a good day. He was a mutt of indeterminate heritage, with wiry brown fur that stuck up in odd directions, no matter how much his family brushed him, and one ear that flopped while the other stood at permanent attention. His eyes were dark and soulful, capable of expressing profound emotion, which would serve him well in the hours to come. Barley had lived with the Henderson family for 5 years, and in that time, he had come to love everything about the winter holidays. Everything, that is, except for one particular tradition. He padded out of the bedroom, his nails clicking softly on the hardwood floor, and made his way to the kitchen, where he could already hear his family moving about. The scent hit him first, cinnamon and butter, and something sweet baking in the oven. His tail began to wag before he could stop it. Emma, the youngest Henderson, was sitting at the kitchen table in her pajamas, swinging her legs and eating cereal. She spotted him immediately. "Barley," she squealed with a particular pitch that only 8-year-olds can achieve before coffee. "It's sweater day." And just like that, Barley's tail stopped mid-wag. His ears, both of them, drooped slightly. He had forgotten. In his excitement over the promising smells and the special daylight, he had completely forgotten about sweater day. Sarah Henderson, Emma's mother, emerged from the pantry holding something red and lumpy. Barley recognized it immediately. The reindeer sweater. His least favorite. Well, actually, that wasn't quite accurate. They were all his least favorite. But the reindeer sweater had a particular kind of itchiness that seemed to target every sensitive spot on his body. "Come here, boy," Sarah said in that cheerful, sing-song voice that humans used when they were about to do something you wouldn't like. "Let's get you festive." Barley considered his options. He could run. He was reasonably fast, and the house had many rooms. But he was also a good dog, and good dogs didn't run from their people, even when those people were approaching with instruments of torture disguised as holiday cheer. He sat, but he made sure his posture conveyed his reluctance. His shoulders slumped, his head drooped. He let out a long, theatrical sigh that seemed to come from his very soul. "Don't be so dramatic," Sarah laughed, crouching beside him. "You look adorable in your sweaters." This, Barley knew, was a fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. The issue was not how he looked. The issue was how he felt. And how he felt, as Sarah pulled the red knitted monstrosity over his head, was itchy. Immediately and intensely itchy. The sweater was made of some kind of yarn that seemed specifically designed to irritate. It had a reindeer face on the back, complete with a pom-pom nose that dangled just out of his reach, taunting him. The neck was too tight, pressing against his throat in a way that made him want to cough. The armholes or leg holes, rather, were positioned just slightly wrong, so that the fabric bunched under his front legs and rubbed with every movement. Sarah tugged the sweater into place, adjusting the pom-pom nose so it sat centered on his back. "Perfect," she announced. "Mark, come look at Barley." Mark Henderson appeared from the living room, already dressed for the day in jeans and a flannel shirt. He took one look at Barley and grinned, looking sharp. "Buddy." Barley gave him a look. It was a particular kind of look that dog owners everywhere would recognize the whale eye. "Scott the piss." He turned his head slightly away, but kept his eyes locked on Mark, showing the whites in an expression of profound, if patient, suffering. His eyebrows, expressive things that they were, drew together in what could only be described as despair. "He hates it," Emma observed cheerfully, completely missing the gravity of the situation. "He'll get used to it," Sarah said, giving Barley a pat on his pom-pom nose. "It's just for today. Just for today." Barley had heard this before. Last year, just for today had turned into 3 separate days, each with a different sweater, each more uncomfortable than the last. He watched as Sarah returned to her holiday preparations, pulling out mixing bowls and ingredients for what smelled like it might be cookies. Mark settled into the living room with his coffee and newspaper. Emma finished her cereal and ran off to get dressed. This was his moment. Barley waited exactly 30 seconds, making sure all humans were thoroughly distracted. Then he began the process. It was a technique he had perfected over several holidays, a carefully choreographed series of movements that he thought of as the wriggle. First, he sat and twisted his head backward, catching the edge of the sweater's neck hole with his teeth. He tugged gently, loosening it. Then, still holding the fabric in his mouth, he pulled backward while simultaneously ducking his head. This created a gap. The gap was crucial. Once he had the gap, he could work his front legs backward through the armholes. This was the tricky part, requiring a careful combination of pulling and pushing and a sort of reverse shimmy that probably looked ridiculous, but was highly effective. The sweater began to slide backward. Carly continued his backward walk, his head now free, feeling the glorious cool air on his neck. He shook himself free of the front leg holes, and the sweater bunched around his middle. From there, it was simpler. Few more backward steps, a final shake, and the reindeer sweater lay on the floor behind him. Defeated. Freedom. Sweet, blessed freedom. Barley stood still for a moment, savoring it. The absence of itching was almost intoxicating. He could feel the air moving through his fur, unobstructed. He could breathe fully without the tightness around his neck. He scratched behind his ear with his hind leg, not because he itched particularly, but simply because he could, because no sweater was in the way. He walked to his favorite spot in the living room, a patch of rug near the fireplace where the morning sun pooled in a warm rectangle. He circled 3 times, as was proper, and then flopped down with a grunt of satisfaction. This was what the holidays should feel like. It's warm, but not itchy, comfortable, free. He had exactly 23 minutes of peace. "Barley, where's your sweater?" Sarah's voice carried from the kitchen, that particular tone that mixed amusement with exasperation. Barley's ears perked up, but he didn't move. Perhaps, if he stayed very still, she would forget about the sweater. Perhaps she would realize that he was perfectly festive, just as he was, with his natural fur and his one floppy ear. Footsteps approached. Barley closed his eyes, feigning sleep. He even added a little snore for authenticity. "Oh no, you don't," Sarah said, and Barley could hear the smile in her voice. She scooped up the abandoned reindeer sweater from where he'd left it. "Nice try, buddy. But we have people coming over, and you need to look festive." Barley cracked one eye open. Then, seeing what Sarah held in her other hand, both eyes opened wide. This was not the reindeer sweater. This was worse. This was the Santa sweater. The Santa sweater was red and white, with a black belt design around the middle and a white fur trim around the neck and hem. It was made of an even thicker material than the reindeer sweater, which meant it was warmer, which meant he would get even more uncomfortable as the day progressed and the house filled with people and cooking heat. The white fur trim, while soft, had a tendency to get in his eyes and mouth. "Come on," Sarah coaxed. "This one's not so bad." Barley knew better than to argue. He stood, his posture radiating resignation, and allowed Sarah to thread his legs through the holes and pull the sweater over his head. The Santa sweater was tight, tighter than the reindeer sweater. The black belt part cinched around his middle in a way that made him feel like he'd eaten too much, even though breakfast was still an hour away. The neck trim immediately began tickling his nose. Sarah adjusted the sweater, trying to smooth it into place, but the tightness meant there was no comfortable position. Barley stood very still, looking at her with an expression that he hoped conveyed the depth of his misery. His eyebrows performed admirably, achieving new heights of sorrowful arch. "Okay, you're being very dramatic," Sarah informed him, but she gave his head a sympathetic scratch before returning to the kitchen. Barley remained standing for a long moment. The Santa sweater was too tight to sit comfortably. He tried, lowering his haunches carefully, but the fabric pulled in all the wrong ways. He stood again, tried lying down, sweater bunched under his chest. He stood once more, considering his options. The kitchen was a symphony of holiday sounds and scents now. The oven timer beeped. Something sizzled on the stove. Sarah was humming along to the Christmas music playing from the small speaker on the counter. The smell of browning butter mingled with vanilla and cinnamon, and despite his discomfort, Barley's nose twitched with interest. He made his way slowly to the kitchen doorway, moving carefully because the tight sweater restricted his stride. He sat in the threshold, the perfect position to observe without being in the way of skill all good dogs mastered. Sarah was rolling out dough for cookies, her movements practiced and efficient. Flour dusted the counter. A bowl of icing in robin's egg blue sat nearby, along with little bottles of sprinkles and colored sugar. "You can't have any," Sarah said, without looking up, apparently having developed the universal parent ability to sense when a dog was hoping for treats. "These are for the guests." Barley hadn't really expected any cookies. They were chocolate, okay? And he knew chocolate was on the forbidden list, but he appreciated being included in the conversation, okay? He watched as Sarah used cookie cutters to create shapes, stars, trees, bells. Each shape was carefully transferred to a baking sheet. The oven opened, releasing a wave of sweet heat that made the tight sweater even more unbearable. The cookies went in. The timer was set. Emma thundered down the stairs, now dressed in a red velvet dress that looked about as comfortable as Barley's sweater felt. She spotted him in the doorway. "Mom, look, we match." This was apparently meant to be a good thing. Barley's tail gave a half-hearted wag, more out of politeness than enthusiasm. Emma crouched beside him, wrapping her arms around his neck in a hug that pushed the tight sweater even tighter. He bore it with patient dignity, leaning slightly into her embrace because he did love her, even when she was an accomplice to his torture. "You're such a good boy," Emma whispered into his fur, and Barley felt his resistance soften slightly. Maybe the sweaters weren't so bad. Maybe he could endure, okay? Maybe. No, they were definitely that bad. The moment Emma released him, Barley could feel every itch, every tight spot, every place where the fabric rubbed wrong. The white fur trim was now in his mouth. He sneezed, trying to dislodge it. The sneeze made the sweater shift, which somehow made it even tighter. Mark called from the living room. "Sarah, what time are your parents arriving?" "Around noon?" Sarah called back. "And my sister's family is coming at 1. More people meant more time in the sweater." Barley's heart sank. He retreated from the kitchen doorway and made his way back to the living room, walking in the stiff, uncomfortable gait that the tight Santa sweater imposed. Mark was arranging logs in the fireplace, preparing for a fire later. The morning sun had moved, and Barley's favorite warm spot was now in shadow. He tried the couch instead, jumping up with difficulty. The sweater really did restrict his movement, tanned, turning several circles before settling. But he couldn't get comfortable. The sweater was too tight to curl up properly, too bunchy to lie flat. He tried lying on his side. The belt part dug into his ribs. He tried his back. The white fur trim fell into his eyes. A key tried his other side. No better. Quah. With a sigh that seemed to come from the very depths of his being, Barley jumped down from the couch. There was only one solution. He would have to deploy the wriggle again. He positioned himself behind the couch where he had some privacy. Santa sweater would be more challenging than the reindeer sweater was tighter, with less give in the fabric. But Barley was determined. He sat and twisted, trying to catch the neck hole with his teeth. The white fur trim made this difficult, filling his mouth with fluff. He spit it out and tried again, this time catching the actual fabric. He pulled. The sweater barely moved. He pulled harder, adding a backward walk. The tightness meant there was very little gap to work with, but Barley was patient. He continued pulling, feeling the fabric begin to give. His head inched backward through the neck hole. The white fur trim dragged across his eyes, but he pushed through, one front leg back, then the other. The sweater caught on his shoulders, stuck. Barley paused, assessing. He tried a shimmy, a rapid side-to-side shake that usually dislodged stuck fabric. The sweater moved a fraction of an inch. He shimmied again, harder, another fraction. This was going to take a while, but Barley was committed now. Freedom awaited, and it would be worth any amount of effort. He shimmied and pulled, pulled and shimmied. The sweater crept backward with agonizing slowness. Finally, his shoulders came free. From there, it was easier. The sweater bunched around his middle, then his hindquarters, then, with one final shake, fell to the floor. Barley stood still, panting slightly from the effort. The cool air on his skin felt like heaven. He could breathe deeply. He could move freely. He shook himself thoroughly, feeling his fur settle back into its natural, slightly scruffy state. This was himself. This was right. He left the Santa sweater in a defeated puddle behind the couch and returned to a spot near the fireplace. The sun had moved again, creating a new, warm rectangle on a different part of the rug. Barley claimed it, circling and settling with a deep sense of satisfaction. He rested his head on his paws and let his eyes drift closed. Perhaps, if he slept, everyone would forget about the sweaters. Perhaps this was the end of his ordeal. He had 18 minutes of peace this time. Barley, James, Henderson, where is your sweater? Sa's voice was closer to true exasperation now, though still laced with amusement. Barley didn't bother feigning sleep this time. He simply looked at her, his expression a masterpiece of innocence. "What sweater?" he seemed to say with his eyes. "I know of no sweater." Behind the couch, Mark called out helpfully. "I can see it from here, traitor," Barley thought, though his tail wagged slightly when Mark came over to give him a scratch behind the ears. Mark retrieved both the Santa sweater and the reindeer sweater from their respective abandoned positions. He held them up for Sarah's inspection. "2 escapes already," Mark said. "He's getting faster." "Third time's a charm," Sarah replied, and Barley's heart sank as he saw what she was pulling out of the closet. "Oh no, not that one. Anything but that one." The blinking lights sweater. It was green and bright, artificial green that no self-respecting plant would claim. It had actual lights woven into it, little LED bulbs in red and white that blinked in an alternating pattern. It required batteries, which were housed in a small plastic pack that hung awkwardly from a pocket. It was, without question, the most uncomfortable, most undignified, most profoundly embarrassing garment that had ever been inflicted upon him. "No," Barley said, or at least he tried to say it. What came out was a low whine, pitched from maximum pathos. "Yes," Sarah said firmly, "and this one clips on, so good luck escaping it." Clips. Barley's ears drooped as Sarah approached with the abomination. She had indeed modified this sweater, apparently wise to his escape techniques. There were small clasps along the belly, designed to prevent any backward wriggling maneuvers. She dressed him efficiently, threading his legs through the holes and fastening each clip with a decisive snap. The blinking light sweater was slightly less tight than the Santa sweater, which was a small mercy, but it was itchy in a new and different way. The fabric had a synthetic quality that seemed to generate static electricity, making his fur stand up in odd patches. And then there were the lights. Sarah turned them on. The sweater began to blink. Red, white, red, white, in an endless, rhythmic pattern. Barley could see them in his peripheral vision, constant and distracting. He stood very still, a dog, frozen in horror in disbelief. "Oh, Barley," Emma breathed, clasping her hands together. "You look so pretty." Pretty was not the word Barley would have chosen. He felt like a Christmas tree had exploded on his body. He turned his head carefully, trying to see the full extent of the damage, and caught sight of himself in the mirror by the front door. The effect was even worse than he'd imagined. The green sweater clashed with his brown fur. The blinking lights gave him a frantic, emergency vehicle quality. The battery pack bumped against his side with every movement. He looked at Sarah, then at Mark, then at Emma. His expression was one of profound betrayal. "How could you do this to me?" his eyes asked. "I thought we were family." "It's just until the guests leave," Sarah promised. "Then you can take it off." Just until the guests leave. Barley knew what this meant. Hours, plural. He would be trapped in this blinking monstrosity for hours, forced to endure not only the physical discomfort, but also the social humiliation of being seen this way by people outside his immediate family. There would be no wriggle this time. The clips saw to that. He had been outmaneuvered. Barley walked carefully to a spot near the fireplace. There was no sun now, but the fire was starting to crackle, sending out gentle warmth, and lay down with as much dignity as he could muster, which, given the circumstances, wasn't much. The battery pack dug into his side. The lights continued their relentless blinking. The synthetic fabric itched in 17 different places simultaneously. He closed his eyes and sighed, a long, suffering exhalation that seemed to echo in the room. This was it. This was his life now. Blinking, itchy, clipped-in holiday decoration, masquerading as a dog. The doorbell rang at exactly 12 minutes past noon. Barley heard it from his position near the fireplace and felt a sense of impending doom. The guests had arrived. There was no escape now, no privacy in which to attempt removing the sweater, even if the clips would allow it. It was about to be seen in public in the blinking light sweater. Emma rushed to the door, her velvet dress swishing. "Grandma, Grandpa." The door opened, bringing with it a rush of cold air and the voices of Sarah's parents. Barley remained where he was, hoping that perhaps if he stayed very still, no one would notice the blinking dog in the corner. "Where's my favorite grandpappy?" came Grandma Henderson's voice, and Barley knew his hope was in vain. She spotted him immediately and let out a sound that was somewhere between a squeal and a laugh. "Oh my goodness, look at him." He's lit up. Carly felt his ears flatten against his head as Grandma Henderson approached. Casey was a kind woman who always slipped him treats when she thought no one was looking. So he bore her enthusiastic petting with patient tolerance. Her hands were cold from outside, which actually felt quite nice against his overheated, sweater-covered body. "Isn't he festive?" Sarah said, appearing with glasses of eggnog. "He's perfect," Grandma Henderson declared. "Can I take a photo?" "Okay." And so began what Barley would later think of as the photo session. Everyone wanted a picture with the blinking dog. Emma posed with him, her arm around his neck. Grandpa Henderson, usually not much for photos, insisted on one with the electric mutt. Even Mark, who it seemed at least somewhat sympathetic to Barley's plight, got in on it, taking a selfie with Barley's blinking form. Through it all, Barley maintained his dignity as best he could. He sat when asked to sit. He stayed when asked to stay. He even managed to tail wag when Emma offered him a small piece of cheese, being one of the few things that could penetrate his fog of discomfort and reach the part of him that was still, despite everything, a food-motivated dog. The house continued to fill. Sarah's sister arrived with her husband and 2 children, both of whom shrieked with delight upon seeing Barley's sweater. More neighbors stopped by with cookies and well wishes. The Pattersons from next door, the Chins from across the street. Old Mrs. Murphy with her walking stick and her tendency to speak very loudly. "What a lovely sweater," Mrs. Murphy shouted, bending down to examine Barley more closely. "Does it take batteries?" "Yes," Sarah confirmed at a much more reasonable volume. "It's there in the pocket." "Very clever," Mrs. Murphy declared. She patted Barley's head with surprising force. Good dog. Through all of this, Barley endured. The living room grew warmer as more people arrived and the fire built up. The kitchen sounds intensified, the oven opening and closing, timers beeping, the chatter of multiple conversations happening at once. The smells were magnificent. Turkey roasting, potatoes with butter and garlic, fresh bread, paiso, mini paisan cookies, and all manner of dishes that made Barley's mouth water despite his misery. He positioned himself strategically near the kitchen, where the flow of foot traffic meant there was always a chance someone might drop something edible. The blinking light sweater made him quite visible, which meant people kept stepping around him with exaggerated care, which meant they were paying attention to what was in their hands, which meant fewer dropped morsels. It was, Barley reflected, just another indignity heaped upon the pile. Emma's cousin, a boy of about 5 named Tyler, became fascinated with Barley's sweater. He sat on the floor next to him, watching the lights blink with an intensity that Barley found slightly concerning. "Does it hurt?" Tyler asked, reaching out to touch one of the lights. "No," Emma assured him. "It's just itchy." "How do you know?" Up at his face. Tyler studied Barley's face carefully. Barley, sensing an opportunity for sympathy, made sure his expression reflected his true inner state, a combination of weary resignation, physical discomfort, and the patient suffering of a martyr. "He looks sad," Tyler concluded. "He always looks sad in his sweaters," Emma said. But Mom says he's fine." "But I'm not fine," Barley thought intensely in Tyler's direction, hoping the boy might prove to be an ally. "I am itchy and hot, and these lights, whoa, and stop blinking, and I'm clipped into this thing like a prisoner." Tyler reached out and gave Barley a gentle pat. "It's okay," he said softly. Christmas is almost over. This was possibly the most comforting thing anyone had said all day. Barley leaned into Tyler's small hand, accepting the sympathy gratefully. The afternoon wore on. People ate and laughed and told stories. Children ran through the house with the particular chaotic energy of holiday gatherings. Adults settled into comfortable conversations. The fire crackled. Music played. And through it all, Barley remained in his blinking sweater, a beacon of green and red and white in a warm, crowded house. He found moments of respite, scratched behind the ears from Grandpa Henderson, a piece of turkey skin that Emma snuck to him when her mother wasn't looking. A few minutes of sitting with his head rested on Marcus' foot, while Mark talked with the Chins about their plans for the new year. These small moments of connection made the discomfort more bearable, if not quite tolerable. As the afternoon turned to evening, guests began to leave. The house gradually emptied. Coats were retrieved from the guest room. Cupperware containers were filled with leftovers. Children were bundled up and carried 2 cars. The goodbye process was lengthy, with multiple rounds of hugs and promises to get together again soon. Finally, the door closed behind the last guest. The house seemed suddenly quiet, despite the 4 remaining Hendersons and 1 very uncomfortable dog. Sarah leaned against the closed door with a satisfied sigh. "Well, that was wonderful." "Exhausting," Mark corrected, but he was smiling. "But wonderful." "Can we open presents now?" Emma asked, still somehow full of energy. "After we clean up a bit," Sarah said, "and maybe after Barley gets out of that sweater. I think he's suffered enough." Barley's ears perked up. His tail, which had been hanging in limp defeat for hours, managed a hopeful wag. Was it possible? Was his ordeal finally coming to an end? Sarah crouched beside him, her fingers finding the clips that had held him prisoner all day. One by one, she unfastened them. The sweater loosened. Barley held very still, afraid to hope, afraid that this might be some kind of trick and another sweater awaited. But no. Sarah pulled the blinking light sweater up and over his head, freeing him completely. A sudden absence of itching, of tightness, of blinking lights was so overwhelming that Barley stood frozen for a moment, hardly believing it was real. Then he shook, was the most vigorous whole-body shake he had ever executed, starting from his nose and traveling down to the tip of his tail. His ears flopped. His fur flew in all directions. The shake seemed to go on forever, expelling all the pent-up discomfort of the day. When he finished, he felt lighter, cooler, like himself again. He looked up at Sarah and Mark and Emma, and his tail wagged with genuine enthusiasm for the first time all day. They were laughing at his celebratory shake, but it was kind laughter, the laughter of people who loved him. "Feel better, buddy?" Mark asked, scratching the exact spot behind Barley's ears that was always itchy. Barley leaned into the scratch, eyes half closing in bliss. Better didn't begin to cover it. He felt reborn. He felt free. He felt like a dog again instead of a mobile Christmas decoration. The family began the process of cleaning up from the party. Barley helped by positioning himself strategically in the kitchen. Here, he could perform his important duty of pre-cleaning any dishes that hit the floor. This duty, he felt, was crucial and often underappreciated. When Emma dropped a fork with a bit of mashed potato still clinging to it, he was there immediately, performing his job with enthusiasm. "Good boy," Emma said, retrieving the knock-lean fork. As the kitchen returned to order and the living room was straightened, the family gradually migrated toward the couch. The fire had burned down 2 coals, radiating a gentle warmth. The overhead lights were dimmed. The Christmas tree lights twinkled softly in the corner. "Present time?" Emma asked hopefully. "Present time," Sarah agreed. They settled onto the couch, Mark on one end, Sarah on the other, Emma between them. There was a space on the floor in front of them, right on Barley's favorite rug, in the warmth of the dying fire. Barley didn't need to be asked twice, stepped into the space and flopped down with a contented grunt, stretching out so that his body was in contact with all 3 of his people. His head rested near Mark's feet. His body curved along the front of the couch. His tail stretched toward Sarah. Emma's hand dropped down to rest on his back, her fingers gently stroking his fur in that absent-minded way of children who love their dogs. The touch was simple, undemanding, without any expectation or requirement. It was just connection, just love, just the comfortable presence of family. Mark's foot shifted slightly, providing a better pillow for Barley's head. Sarah's hand reached down to scratch behind his ear, in that perfect spot that made his back leg want to kick in satisfaction. This, Barley thought as his eyes began to drift closed. This was what the holidays were really about. Not the sweaters, not the decorations, not even the wonderful food, though he did still appreciate that piece of turkey skin Emma had given him. It was this, the warm house after the guests had gone, the peaceful quiet after the chaos, the simple comfort of being together. It was Mark's foot warm against his head, Emma's fingers gentle on his back, Sarah's presence solid and reassuring beside him. It was the smell of the extinguished candles, the soft glow of the tree lights, the crackling pop of the fire's last embers. No itching, no tightness, no blinking lights. Just him, Barley, exactly as he was, surrounded by the people he loved most, who loved him back. Not because he looked festive or wore ridiculous sweaters or posed for photos, but simply because he was theirs and they were his. Emma began opening a present, the paper rustling softly. The sound was soothing, part of the gentle soundtrack of a peaceful evening. Barley's breathing deepened, becoming the slow, regular rhythm of a dog settling into sleep. His muscles relaxed completely, the tension of the day finally releasing. He thought briefly about the morning, about the reindeer sweater and the Santa sweater and the terrible blinking light sweater. He thought about the wriggle, about his repeated escapes and recaptures, about the cycle of hope and disappointment that had marked his day. And somewhere in his dog heart, in the simple, honest way that dogs understood things, he realized something important. The sweaters had been uncomfortable, yes, undignified, Absolutely. But they had been worn out of love, however misguided. His family had wanted him to be part of the celebration, to share in the festivity, to be included. They couldn't know, really exactly how itchy the reindeer sweater was, or how tight the Santa sweater felt, or how overwhelming the blinking lights were to a dog's eyes. They had meant well, and now, with the sweaters finally off and put away, they were showing him love in a language he understood perfectly, touch and presence and peaceful togetherness. Next year, there would probably be sweaters again. Barley knew this with the certainty of a dog who had experienced multiple holiday seasons. There would probably be new sweaters, possibly even more ridiculous than this year's collection, and he would probably deploy the wriggle again, would probably give the whale eye in the long-suffering sighs, would probably spend hours in itchy discomfort while guests cooed over how festive he looked. But that was next year's problem, okay? Tonight, there was only this: warmth, comfort, family, and peace. Mark turned on a holiday movie, the volume low. The familiar music and voices created a gentle background hum. Sarah and Emma's quiet commentary drifted over Barley's head. Someone probably immediate a blanket over the back of the couch, and a corner of it fell onto Barley's back, adding an extra layer of coziness. Barley sighed, but this time it wasn't the dramatic, long-suffering sigh of earlier. This was the sigh of deep contentment, the kind that came from being exactly where you wanted to be, exactly as you wanted to be. His eyes closed fully. His body relaxed into complete rest. The warmth from the dying fire, the gentle touches of his family, the full belly from his successful scavenging, the blessed absence of itchy sweaters all combined into a perfect moment of peace. Kana shifted on the couch above him, getting more comfortable as she watched the movie. Her hand never left his back, maintaining that constant, gentle contact. Barley could feel the rise and fall of her breathing, could sense the way she relaxed more deeply into the cushions. Mark's foot twitched slightly in his sleep. He was already dozing. Barley could tell the small movement was oddly comforting, a reminder that they were all here together, all safe, all home. Sarah got up quietly to turn off the kitchen lights, moving through the house with the practiced stealth of a mother who knew how to avoid disturbing, peaceful moments. When she returned, she brought with her a mug of something that smelled like cinnamon and chocolate. She settled back into her corner of the couch, and Barley felt a slight shift in weight, the way the couch cushions compressed differently with her return. The movie played on, but Barley wasn't really aware of it anymore. He had drifted into that perfect state between waking and sleeping, where the world felt soft and distant and safe. His consciousness narrowed to the simple, present sensations: warmth, touch, the sound of breathing, the feeling of being loved and loving in return. In his drifting thoughts, he saw the day replay in soft, dreamlike images: the morning light, the reindeer sweater with its terrible pom-pom nose, his triumphant first escape, the feel of freedom, the tight Santa sweater, the humiliation of the blinking lights, but also the piece of cheese from Emma, the turkey skin, Tyler's gentle pat and sympathetic words, Grandma Henderson's treats, the moment when the last clip came undone and the sweater lifted away, and this, always this, at the end of the day. This moment of being together, of being accepted exactly as he was, slightly scruffy. One ear up and one down, fur sticking out in odd directions, no decorations needed. His tail gave one last gentle wag against the floor, a final statement of contentment before sleep claimed him fully. Above him, Emma whispered to Sarah, "Is Barley asleep?" "I think so," Sarah whispered back. He really didn't like those sweaters. No, he really didn't. There was affection in Sarah's voice, and perhaps just a hint of apology. Maybe next year we could just put a bow on his collar instead. Barley's ear twitched at this. Even in his drowsy state, this sounded like a promising development. Bow he could probably tolerate. A bow wouldn't be itchy, okay? Bo wouldn't restrict his movement or make him hot or blink in his peripheral vision. Okay, that's a good idea, Sarah said softly. I think Barley would like that better. Barley wanted to wag his tail in approval, but he was too far into sleep now. The conversation faded into background noise, indistinguishable from the movie sounds and the soft crackle of the dying fire. He dreamed of running through snow without any sweater at all, just his own warm fur and the cold air on his face. He dreamed of turkey and cookies and cheese appearing on the floor in an endless, magical succession. He dreamed of summer days and winter nights, of the Henderson family through all seasons of being loved and being free and being himself. The house settled into its nighttime sounds. The refrigerator hummed. The old floorboards creaked as the temperature dropped outside. The Christmas tree lights continued their gentle twinkling, casting soft colors across the darkened room. Mark's snoring started, a gentle rumble that matched the rhythm of Barley's own breathing. Emma giggled softly at something in the movie. Sarah sipped her cocoa, the tiny sound of liquid and ceramic barely audible. And Barley slept, deep and dreamless now, his body completely relaxed, his mind at peace. He was warm but not overheated, comfortable but not constrained, present but not performing. Just a dog, sleeping with his family, exactly as nature and love intended. The hours passed. The movie ended. Another one started. Or perhaps it was just music playing. Barley was too deeply asleep to know or care. Emma eventually dozed off too, curling into the couch cushions. Sarah stayed awake a bit longer, reading on her phone, enjoying the quiet. The fire died down to ash. The Christmas tree lights went off on their timer. The house grew dark except for the soft glow from the streetlights outside, filtered through curtains. And still, Barley slept on, steady and peaceful, a warm presence on the floor, anchor and companion to the family he loved. In the deep night, when even Sarah had finally gone to bed, Barley stirred briefly. He lifted his head, blinking in the darkness, momentarily disoriented. Where was he? What time was it? Then his eyes adjusted, and he saw the familiar shapes of his home, the couch, the armchair, the Christmas tree in the corner. He was on his rug, in his spot. The house was quiet and safe. Everyone was sleeping. All was well. He turned in a circle, found a slightly different position, and settled again. His last conscious thought before sleep reclaimed him was a simple one, expressed in the wordless way that dogs understood the world. Home, family, love. No sweaters. Perfect. When morning came, it would bring new smells and new sounds and new adventures. There might even be leftover turkey for breakfast if he deployed his most effective sad eyes. But that was tomorrow's joy. Tonight, or really, the very early hours of the morning, there was only this: peace, warmth, comfort, and the quiet happiness of a dog who knew he was loved. Sweaters or no sweaters, always and forever, exactly as he was. The house breathed around him, settling and sighing in its own way. The winter wind picked up outside, rattling the windows gently, but inside all was warm and still. Barley's breathing deepened again, his paws twitched slightly as he dreamed of chasing something wonderful through an endless, sweater-free meadow, and somewhere in the closet, folded neatly and put away until next year. 3 holiday sweaters waited in the darkness: the reindeer with its pom-pom nose, the tight Santa with its white fur trim, and the blinking light sweater with its battery pack and clips had served their purpose, had made the humans happy, had created photos and memories and laughter. But they were not what mattered. They had never been what mattered. What mattered was asleep on the rug, furry and snoring and absolutely perfect, just as he was. What mattered was the love that needed no decoration, no costume, no embellishment. What mattered was simple presence, honest affection, and the comfortable joy of being together. Barley would wear the sweaters again next year. This was inevitable. He would give the whale eye and deploy the wriggle and endure the itching with his characteristic long-suffering patience. But he would also have this, the knowledge that at the end of the day, the sweaters would come off, and he would be here, on his rug, surrounded by his family. Loved for exactly who he was, and really, what more could any dog want? The night deepened. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The neighborhood slept, and in the Henderson house, a slightly scruffy mutt with one ear up and one ear down dreamed his peaceful dog dreams, free of itching, free of lights, free of everything except love and warmth and home. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. Tonight, there was only peace, and that was enough. That was everything. That was the real spirit of the holidays, understood perfectly by a dog who hated sweaters, but loved his family with every fiber of his honest, patient, furry heart. If this story resonated with you and brought a smile to your face as you drift towards sleep, please consider showing your support with a like, and subscribe to Deep Sleep Stories Hub for more quiet nights and restful journeys. May your dreams be as peaceful as Barley's, and may you always know the comfort of being loved exactly as you are. Sleep well.